Hi everybody, thank you so much for those of you who are tuning in. Remember to subscribe to this YouTube channel, also subscribe to Spotify and iTunes. And we have I'm going to show you some clips from our Korero that we've just had. So we've got Hana and Haylee. Do you just want to introduce yourselves a little bit and talk about what we've just talked about?
Kia ora, ko Haylee koroi tō kuunga, he uri tēnei no te taitokiro. My name's Haylee, from the far north. We've just talked about colonisation, decol, self-care, finding your people.
Everything, the whole shebang.
Kia ora, ko Hana Burgess tōku ingoa, he uri tēnei no Ngāpuhi. Yeah, we've been getting deep, guys, talking about the meaning of love.
And how we can work together, Māori and Pasifika work together. So that's awesome. Thank you so much and enjoy the podcast. All right, 1, 2, 3, go. All right, tala whalawa malo so for maua marilangi mama and kia ora koutou katoa. My name is Tima and this is the Tima Talks podcast. And I'm here with two amazing wahine toa, and they're going to introduce themselves real quick before we get started because we're going to have a great kōrero. Let's go.
Kia ora tātou, ko Haylee koroi tōku ingoa, he uri tēnei no te taitokiro, ko whakarongorua te maunga ko awanui te awa ko ngā tuki mata whaurua te waka, ko mokonuia rangi te marae, ko te ngahi te hapu, ko taura tūmaru te tangata. Kia ora everyone, my name is Haylee, I'm from the far north, te taitokiro, and from a little valley called Utakura. Yeah, if you're not going there, you definitely drive past it, but yeah, kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you.
Kia ora, ko Whiri e te maunga, ko hokianga whakapau karakia te moana, ko Ngāpuhi te iwi, ko Ngāti Wharara, Ngāti Korokoro me te pauka ngā hapu, ko te whakarongotai te marae, ko Hana tōku ingoa. Kia ora, I'm Hana, I'm from the Hokianga, the most beautiful place in the entire universe. I know everyone says that about where they're from, but genuinely, the Hokianga is the most beautiful place. Kia ora.
Yeah, I love that, and thank you so much for making time to have this kōrero with me. Being, I'm born and bred here in New Zealand, Pasifika, but I don't know enough about tangata whenua and the issues that they're going through. So that's why and also I don't know enough about colonisation. When people ask me about colonisation, I'm like, oh, it's just evil white people that took over a stolen land, which
you're not wrong. But
not wrong. But yeah. But before we begin, please tell us a little bit about yourselves. What are your hobbies? Where do you study? Or what's some of the mahi that you're passionate about doing? We'll start with you.
Sure.
Haylee.
So what am I doing right now? So I'm 2 weeks unemployed at the moment, which seems to be the centre of a lot of my conversation lately, and I probably shouldn't open with that. But yeah, I think what that really means, or what that really looks like, is trying to gain autonomy over my own time more than anything, and the energy that I put out. So I used to work in Māori public health. I also do a lot of work with young Māori people. We're in the 5th year of a wānanga called Mahuri Totara. Mahuri Totara is the sapling totara that grows, and the wānanga is just about nurturing them to be part of the forest, essentially. We're very metaphorical people, I think, quite like other islands in the Pacific. But yeah, I am a creative writer. We both are founding members of a creative collective called Kowaka, which is on Instagram and Facebook, and we have a website too. I like to engage in critical thinking on things to do with anything Māori, anything to do with sovereignty. Just out here just trying to get our land back. Was it
always, growing up in your home, I asked you this before, but did you grow up Māori?
Yeah, from birth for sure. I was actually born in London, so yes, I was born Māori in the colonisers' land, but all good, we came back. My mother's actually Pākehā, so she's from Scotland and Ireland and Wales, and my father is from the far north, as I said earlier. Yeah, growing up Māori, I think it's about, as I said, we had a discussion prior, and all of my main relationships were with my father's side of the family. He has 8 brothers and sisters who are all Māori. But then I had to compete with sitting in educational spaces for 8 hours a day, which centred colonial philosophies and colonial histories and English as a language. And I think what was clear to me even as a child was where people seated power. So they gave a lot of power to those educational spaces, and maybe my whānau spaces weren't given as much attention or mana. So yeah, it was very peripheral for a long time, my engagement in Te Ao Māori. But I think in the last maybe 6 years, it's really, when you highlight those power dynamics, you are given the ability to manipulate them and shift them, and that's really what the last few years for me has been about, is recentering power in Te Ao Māori and trying not to, pushing the things that don't serve us to the periphery, which is things relating to colonisation, essentially.
Kia ora. What about you, Hana? What do you like to do in your spare time? And also, did you grow up Māori?
So I'll just start with where I grew up.
Yeah,
so I was born in Auckland, and I lived on the shore till I was 9, and then through my dad's job I moved to Australia, lived there for 5 years, and then moved to Thailand and lived in Thailand for 5 years, and then came back here for uni. So my upbringing, I was brought up Māori, but it was very different because I was kind of overseas, so we didn't get to go to our marae, I didn't get to learn the language, I wasn't kind of immersed, and I wasn't on my whenua. So for me, I kind of, growing up thinking about being Indigenous and my indigeneity was very kind of at a wider scale, I was in Thailand, and but I started, I think growing up overseas, I'd see, especially in Thailand, I'd see a lot of inequities and inequalities that didn't quite sit right with me. I kind of go to school past slums and I'd be like something's not right with this, but just because of going to a British international school and getting that kind of education, I didn't quite have the language to be able to understand that. And it wasn't until I moved back here and started studying public health, I learned about colonization, and I learned about these power structures and oppression, and suddenly all of these inequities and these health, these health issues that face our community, which is what I do, I work in public health, started to make sense, because at the individual level I was surely these narratives about Māori, being Māori, I knew that wasn't our reality. And so as soon as I started Haylee understanding the bigger picture, understanding power structures, I was oh my gosh, this is what's driving our health outcomes, this is why our society is kind of how it is. So speaking to the camera, so that kind of led me into doing masters and then now a PhD in Māori health. I'm a reader, I'm a writer, I'm a thinker, and so I love critical thinking. Haylee and I we'll go for coffee and we'll be okay, figure out the meaning of life, over coffee, what is it? But for me, I see a real importance, because for a while, working in academia, doing a PhD, I really struggled because I was I'm in a Western institution, I'm in this colonizing space, it wasn't quite sitting right with me. But then through a lot of conversations, I realized that we need our people everywhere, we need our people on the ground, we need our people in institutions. And so that's really kind of informed my activism and informed the way I make a difference, by realizing that as Māori and as a woman, I need to hold space here and chip away at this, just kind of we all chip away in our own spaces. So yeah, doing a PhD at the moment, and that's kind of my form of resistance, that's my front line. I guess. Yeah,
I love that. Awesome. And did you grow up Māori?
Yeah, so we were having a conversation about this before, and I don't actually like that question, because I feel it creates this kind of growing up Māori or not. So I used to think, especially growing up overseas, that I didn't grow up Māori, because I thought growing up Māori meant growing up on the marae, fluent in te reo, but I think what I realise now is that I did very much grow up Māori. It's just that as Māori, we live in so many diverse contexts with different relationships with our language and with our whenua, a lot of which is, structured by these colonial contexts. And so I think we're, through Māori whakapapa, we're growing up Māori. It's just that what that means is so diverse, and we're all kind of at different, we're all on different journeys, I guess, trying to like reclaim that or not. But yeah, I think to me it's about whakapapa.
Amen.
Yeah.
Nice. That's so cool. So for those of us who don't understand what colonisation is, because there are people in my community that don't exactly understand it or they just don't understand it, how would you explain it to them? You can take turns.
So I think what's very difficult is that, so first of all, colonisation is a system, so you can't actually see it, so it's invisible. It's a norm, especially if you've grown up in a colonised society. The way that I rationalise, and because the thing is we interact with and encounter colonisation all the time through things that people say and the way they uphold the systems. If you're not being decolonial, you're essentially upholding colonisation, because if your complicity is supporting the current system, essentially. But the way that I kind of have rationalised it is colonisation has been this process of really breaking up ecosystems. That's essentially, to me, in terms that I can understand best, that's what colonisation is. It's breaking up ecosystems. So at the arrival of settlers to New Zealand, we were living as part of ecosystems on the land, on the land with our marae, with our food sources. We made some mistakes along the way, but we knew inherently that our survival as people was wound up in upholding the mana of the environment as a whole. And so if I think of colonisation, what it was the gradual breakdown of those ecosystems. So they removed us from our lands. We were no longer conversating and organising in hapu structures. Then we were like kind of isolated in these urban cities, and even then our whānau structures, our family structures are very dysfunctional a lot of the time. Communication is very hard, and even the ecosystem of our own our bodies, that's a microsystem, an ecosystem in and of itself. So when I think of all the ways that colonisation kind of impacts on me personally, it's do I understand the cycles of my own body? Do I understand how that works with the cycles in the environment, the maramataka or the lunar calendar, and especially as climate change is starting to change those patterns. And then decolonisation to me is about reminding ourselves that we are parts of ecosystems and starting to rebuild those, starting to have our lives informed by those ecosystems rather than sitting outside of them and viewing them from the outside. Yeah, that's how I think of colonisation.
Do you want to add to that, Hana? Or?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me with colonisation, which Haylee already touched on, was this deliberate removing, so in Aotearoa, the deliberate removing, the dismantling, which was very violent. Our ways of being, our ways of knowing, our social structures. So tearing those apart and then replacing them with colonial ones. So education systems, legal systems, and the worldviews, I guess, that inform those. So with colonisation came racism, sexism, homophobia, and all of these kind of worldviews that are now deeply rooted within the systems that make up New Zealand or society as we know it today. And so people often think of colonisation as a thing of the past that happened, and one event, as opposed to a system that is fueled and maintained by the structures in our society. So you can see that in the languages we speak at school, or the way the justice system is set up. This is all deliberate, and this is all has roots in colonisation.
Yeah, even at my high school in Christchurch, we had to speak Japanese, we had to learn Japanese, French, and something else, but we didn't speak te reo. There was no te reo Māori course, which is ridiculous. Christchurch, step it up, do better.
I know, Christchurch.
What are your personal experiences with colonialism?
Well,
with colonisation.
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is that we wake up and we go to sleep in a colonial context. What I suppose a part of me moving out of formal employment has been an attempt to move from the space of decolonizing, which is recognizing that we are part of the ecosystem, to indigenizing, which is being informed and having our lives informed by the land and by those natural cycles. So it's about trying to move away from this 40-hour structure that's like, this is how things are, because that's not an ecosystem. Like a tree doesn't, a tree doesn't shed its leaves over 40 hours. It does it, however, is according to the ecosystem that it engages with. And so I want to give my body and my thought processes space to recenter within the ecosystems that I exist in. And that includes my family too. And I think an important part of kind of tearing those colonial systems apart is to start communicating in our families again, because honestly I've personally found that extremely hard. Healthy relationships is something within our families is something that I think we all need to work on a little bit, and because those are the primary units that really make up us as hapu and as communities and nations. And if we can get that right, then I think that can be a blueprint for how we communicate on a broader scale.
Do you have any personal experiences with colonisation?
Yes,
Hana?
my whole existence.
My whole life since birth.
I think just in terms of like my engagement with colonialism, like it definitely started with like, just from my personal experience with like actually realizing it's a thing, because it's invisible, it's so deeply rooted in our society, and growing up we take it for granted, like the status quo is colonial, and I always thought the status quo, it is how it is, and I see that in a lot of our whānau too, which is also a deliberate result of this kind of like individual kind of like personal choice narrative that kind of runs through society. You're in the position you are because of how hard you worked, as opposed to these structures kind of very much informing, I guess how we live in this country. So for me, I think that liberation of the mind, or that decolonizing the mind, was my first kind of like, oh my God, this is a thing. And then you learn about it, you have conversations, and then it's kind of like, okay, now what? And so it's kind of like that whole thing of, I'm sure we've already going through realizing like my whole life's a lie, my education was a lie, and then you kind of and you see the world differently, and you can't unsee it, and that's kind of the journey that I think it's brought Haylee and I together too, is kind of like you have that realization and you start stripping away the layers of society, and that's where being Indigenous comes in. That's where being Māori comes in, and that reconnecting to that.
And just to add to that, I think like in a like very practical sense, for those who maybe don't understand the theoretical side of things, is like I basically now feel like I have to question every single norm that exists. So this idea that like working really hard, or like working for 40 hours, or productivity is like makes you a valuable and noble person, that is colonial. Because what happened when colonizers arrived here is they saw that we were looking after our bodies, that our whānau were resting, that they were taking care of themselves,
having plant-based diets,
having really like good diets, and then they were like, that's lazy. This is actually what being a good person looks like, and it's actually like slaving away, like putting a huge amount of stress on your body, probably shortening your lifespan, and so now we've really bought into this idea that working hard until you die is kind of like this great thing, but it's colonial at its roots, and we need to get back to this idea of rest and of nourishing our bodies, because they want us to die early. Like, I hate to say it, but they want us to be busy working so that we can't dismantle the system.
I love that I just feel really, that's so true. That's so true, because that's like, and it's really sad, like my mum's going to watch this because she sees all my Facebook stuff.
Hi Mum.
But it's so true, because that's the way my parents operate. My parents are really like 40 hours a week, do overtime if you can, sacrifice family time to make money, get a $1 million mortgage or whatever, and that's flip.
And like the hard thing about that is like, we have to do that because colonization stripped us away from all of our wealth. It stripped us away from our resource base, and so actually, like, yes, rest is the ideal, but also we can't rest because they've taken all of the things that give us the ability to live autonomously. You know, obviously, like when I go home, I have nowhere to go, which is like strange because those are our ancestral lands and they've been in the hands of our tipuna for 800 plus years, but I don't even have anywhere to go when I go there. So yeah, I think our parents responded because they had to, and it was a matter of a survival thing. But I think for us in this generation as starting to question whether that's still necessary.
And we have the power to make that change.
And honouring their sacrifice by returning to our old ways.
It's so cool. So how what does self-care look like for both of you, Wahine? Like, what does it look like? You want to start, Hana?
Going up north, going home,
to the greatest place in the universe.
When I think about self-care, I think about how do I nourish myself, like what fills me up. And so one key part of that for me has been going up north, going home. Whakapapa has been a really big part of my journey in terms of decolonising, being in touch with my whakapapa, and as well as spiritual. I see that as a very physical thing too. So standing on my maunga, you know, swimming in my awa, and so that's a really big part of how I rest and how I refill. But living in Auckland, I can't do that every day. So self-care to me is like hanging out with my friends, hanging out with people that fill me up, having these conversations. And it's more, when I think about rest, it's more than just, you know, lying down in bed watching Netflix, you know, because to me, like, yes, you might physically need that rest, but it's about filling yourself up. So for me, that's social, that's hanging out with my whānau, hanging out with my cousins.
Having a good laugh.
And and also like, and just chilling, like,
Self-care. That's such, self-care is like the new thing. It's like it's the big thing
face
nowadays.
mask.
Yoga, green tea.
Self-care, that's a tough one. I think especially being in urban spaces, it's self-care for me has been about finding other people who really like support my way of being. And that's been like a matter of like, it's been a necessity. It's not a luxury. In my opinion, like you have to be around people that support you, otherwise it's just too hard. So they're a big part of my self-care plan, is just being around good friends like Hana and others who not only like you theorize with, but who actually like support you and what it means to be decolonial. So, you know, Hana came along to this podcast with me after I just like threw it out there.
Thank you.
I was like,
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And like these kinds of conversations, just like they give me hope, like that there's like something better ahead. And that to me is hope is like self-care for sure.
Nice. Do you have these types of conversations with Pākehā? And if so, what does that look like? Is it frustrating? Is it like ugh, or is it like a good? Do you see it as like a good way? Like it's a perfect opportunity to talk to them and educate them.
I think that relates to self-care too, because part of my journey is being very mindful of my energy. You know, like energy is finite. Picking your battles is really important as an activist, and I think just through being mindful of my energy, like it's come to a point where most of my friends are Indigenous or like people of colour, and I work in a Māori space. But I'm Māori and Pākehā, and we do have these conversations in my whānau, but I think I've learnt a lot over the years, because I used to get really fired up over the smallest things, and then suddenly I'm like in a keyboard warrioring at this like, I don't know, New Zealand Herald post or something. But I think for me, I'm really mindful of my energy, and you know, things will come up and I'll be like, you know, just assessing, is this a moment where we can learn? But also actually that's not my role. And I think you can plant seeds, so I think about it as planting seeds. And we can plant seeds with Pākehā, we can make relationships with allies, but I think as Indigenous women, we can't carry the weight of educating every single person we come across, because that's not self-care.
You, Haylee?
That's a tough question for me. Well, I think, because my mother's Pākehā, and I have a Pākehā side of the family who I love dearly. I think for a lot of actually my life, I felt like I've really like kind of lived this double life that my family don't always know about and understand, and that I don't always feel that I can actually communicate. And so that's been difficult, but I think it's starting to feel, this is just my observation, it's starting to feel like I'm so distant in terms of the things I'm doing on the daily that my family have maybe caught up, and they're like, oh, like she seems really far away. And so now they're kind of like, oh, okay, maybe I should check into what she's doing. And so, you know, my mum has really been supportive of the stuff going on at Ihu Mātau, which was a really big, I think, learning for her. And she would come and sit in on the talks from Sina Brown Davis and those people. So I think she's in a very learning space right now. And I will be there if she needs to talk about it. But for me, and frankly, like that's probably the most important conversation for me, is with my mum.
Right.
I don't know if I owe it to anybody else to really teach them. I don't know if I have the energy for that. Yeah, it's so just true. Very heavy, and I think Māori women already have enough on their shoulders to have to deal with that as well.
We saw a lot about Ihu Mātau on social media, on the news. Can you paint us a picture of what it looks like now? Because it seems like Jacinda's pretty much not going to turn up and support her people. So we don't really hear much about it on social media. On social media, yes, but depending on who you follow. But on mainstream media, we don't really see much of Ihu Mātau. We just see three ignorant bastards on the breakfast show. We don't see anything else more important. Can you paint us a picture of what it looks like now?
Sure. So I was out there last Sunday. So every Sunday they do work with whenua warrior, who's Kelly, and they're trying to restore the whenua through planting. And so firstly, I think that's cool and you should come. So there's restoration happening on the whenua, and so that's the first thing. Secondly, obviously, like I'm not mana whenua. I really am not in the know in terms of the politics side of things, but in terms of what's publicly known, we haven't made any headway in terms of where conversations with the government are at. I personally think Jacinda is serving her people, we're just not her people. Right. I'm like super disappointed with our Māori caucus, but at the same time, I never really had that great expectations of Labour to begin with. Not because, or just because, you know, as much as there's 7 Māori MPs and they're the biggest Māori caucus ever in history, they still have to toe the party line, and the party line is not Māori. So I'm not disappointed because, you know, that's exactly how they've always been. But also I think what's happening at Ihu Mātau is the opportunity for us to get things right. And frankly, I think people have had enough of people getting things wrong. So I personally can't see any way to move forward without the land being returned. It'll just hit the wall. So like true. There's one way, and it's returning the land. Yeah. So we may as well just
do it. Hurry up and do it.
Yeah.
Fletchers. What about you, Hana? The future Dr. Hana?
I think Haylee covered that quite nicely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, do you have any? How do you think Māori and Pasifika can work together to decolonise Aotearoa and the Pacific as a whole?
I think, well, for me, I understand everything through whakapapa, and it's about whakapapa. You know, we are all whanaunga across the Pacific, and I think, you know, one of the sad impacts of colonisation is that they've seen the water as something that separates us, and so through the colonisation of the Pacific, we're kind of been separated as these different islands, as opposed to, you know, our ancestors saw the Pacific as something that connected us, and we, like, at a time when the colonizers thought they'd literally fall off the end of the world, we were like sailing across the Pacific. We were in relation and we were trading, you know. So I think, you know, firstly we can, you know, return to that. We can see each other as whanaunga, and then, you know, build off those relationships and see, it's like focus on our connections, and then through that we can start the revolution. I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And so
that's
for me, it's about our relationships,
Yeah.
and it's about whakapapa.
Yeah, and I think that's about restoring that ecosystem, eh?
Yeah,
'Cause the Pacific
yeah,
is an
yeah.
ecosystem. Because we all function and we had our roles to play and our responsibilities, and I think restoring that is decolonial for sure. I think this really great space that I've been able to take part in is the waka haurua space, so the double hull waka that a lot of our tipuna actually use to move between islands. So that's the Haunui waka and others that are that are usually in port at the New Zealand Maritime Museum. And I've met a whole bunch of people from the Pacific there, and the moana is literally our point of connection. So being on waka haurua has been a real eye-opener for me in terms of re-establishing those relationships, because because the treaty kind of redefined our relationship. It was like, we're tangata whenua, you're not tangata whenua. And well, actually, we had relationships before that, and it was, as relations. And so it's returning to waka haurua has been a real journey of re-establishing relationships with really amazing people. Who are like studying about tatao, and who I met a family last week who were talking about that the waka takitimu was actually built in Samoa, and it was initially called, forgive me if I get this wrong, whaulepo. And as soon as she said that, I was like, you mean like carved in the night? Because whao is the Māori term for to carve, and po is like the night. So I knew straight away, and so te reo is another thing, is our languages are so similar. And I think what we've lost here maybe, in terms of the meanings of our words, can be restored through having conversations around the commonalities in our languages. So I think that's something amazing that we should definitely be looking into, because in New Zealand, our languages, even though you may say a Māori word, it's the meaning that becomes colonised. So aroha, turning aroha into love is like the pinnacle of like colonialism in a real sense, because like firstly, colonisers don't even know no one knows what love is. What is love? Like, what does love mean? But the word aroha means to, aro is like to be in the presence of or to pay attention to, and ha is like breath. So to be in the presence of another person's breath. So this is actually like a blueprint for how we be in connection with one another, how we be in relation with one another, But when you put this word love there, you're like, cool, so how does that work? But actually I think if we return to if we can look at those words and remember what they mean, and look to the islands and see how those words are being practiced, that we can remember the whakapapa or the root of those words.
As you said that, what came to mind was the hongi.
And
that's so cool. Thank you for sharing. And so do you have any advice or any words of encouragement for any young wahine out there who are too scared to step into that space and fight for tangata whenua and the rights of tangata whenua?
That's a hard
That's
one.
a real
sorry.
hard one.
No,
it's all right.
It's important.
Because I'm sure there's other young women out there who are living in a Pākehā space and want to step in, you know what I mean?
I would firstly say protect yourself, firstly. And then try to find your people that will support you. Because we can't get through this as individuals. It's not.
And we're a collective anyway, us brownies.
And if you honestly, I think places like Ihu Mātau were great because you knew that people were there, well, for the most part, for the same reasons. And so, not to use the movement in that way, but to just seek out spaces where sovereignty is really the first principle or the, the point of pursuit. And I would really just, the thing is we have to understand that fear comes from this colonial system that either one endangers us through our seeking to re-indigenize, and that is perfectly valid feeling. And secondly, it's like this idea that we have to step out of what's normal, and that's super scary, but also like all of our liberation is on the other side, on the other side of fear. So find your safe spaces and protect yourself, and just
Cool.
holla. You need a hand.
Slide into the DMs.
I think same for me, like my biggest thing would be find your people. It took me like till my 20s to really find my people, but there's community, you know, and that's one of the cool things I think about living in Auckland, is that there's community. You know, I found my community on K Road, I found my community at Auckland University, and it's really building and nurturing your relationships with other Indigenous people, Indigenous men and women, and especially my relationships with Indigenous women, because I think when we found each other, we were like, oh my gosh, and so nurturing those relationships, but it does require stepping out of your comfort zone, which is really hard, but comfort zones, they're like the enemy, because comfort zones, that's the status quo, that's what we're used to, and the status quo is colonial, you know, and so I think it takes a lot of courage to step out of that, and maybe going to things by yourself, saying no, letting go of old relationships that maybe were harmful, not serving you, and so it does take quite a lot of like severing, I guess, of things that don't serve you, but that opens up space, and I think that is really cool. So the saying no is like a huge one as well.
And also teaching them to pronounce Māori words correctly, you know. And like, I still get mocked for saying manurewa, and it's just normal for me to say, like, they're like, oh, rewa, I'm like, no, it's manurewa, but even starting there would be good.
And it's little things
like that.
And then same with like building relationships, you know, that doesn't just have to happen in person, you know, Instagram, Twitter, there's these huge communities online where you can like connect. Like, I know so many people, especially my friends who work in creative spaces, that are building these relationships online, and then, you know, fostering those in person, and then, you know, meeting someone Indigenous who's on Turtle Island, who's Native American, and then being able to, you know, use technology to connect. Like, there's so much potential.
And I think that like the important thing also to remember is that Māori identity is not singular. Like, it looks like lots and lots and lots of different things, and it doesn't depend on your skin colour, it doesn't depend on your fluency in Te Reo Māori, it doesn't depend on where you live or what job you have, you know. I think if you're like striving to contribute to a collective, and if you're like striving to restore that ecosystem that's like healing, then that, I personally think that's something that's very Māori to me. But you're like, if you have Māori whakapapa, you're Māori, and like you are born with the rights to be Māori, and it's like as simple as that, really.
And I just want to thank you for correcting me with that question. I don't think I'll ever ask that question again, how Māori are you? But I think I needed to ask, to ask because now I know. Alright, so for those of you who are listening, those of you who are watching, don't ask someone how Māori or how Samoan they are or whatever, okay? You guys mentioned before that you're fundraising for something. Is that something that we can support with, that anyone in my audience can help with?
Oh yes, so I'm part of a group called Te Arawhatu.
And what do you guys do?
We do work in the climate change space. We're a group of young Indigenous people from around the Pacific. In December, we're going to the United Nations climate talks, which have just been confirmed that they've been moved to Madrid in Spain. We're currently fundraising to get there, and we're hoping to like make sure that money is not a barrier for any of our members. So if you could support us in any way,
there's a link or anything?
Yeah, I can
get it off
you a
you.
link.
Yeah, cool.
Follow us on
Click
Instagram.
Below. Click below.
Never done that. Yeah, follow us Te Arawhatu on Instagram or Facebook.
So that's at Te Arawhatu.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much. That concludes the end of the podcast. Unless you guys want to sing a song or end with a no, okay. We'll end with a karakia or something.
Yeah,
great. Yeah.
We should probably have opened with karakia. So
true. We'll do it back
all the way back.
Yeah.
So the karakia I'm about to do is it talks about, so in our marae we have the tahuhu, which is the very centre pole of our wharenui, and that's where all of our tipuna or our ancestral conversations or korero are usually, they sit up there. So this karakia is about kind of hanging those korero up so that they can be like made permanent in a way into like the tahuhu of the AUT building that we're in. So yeah, just to provide context.
Nice.
Unuhia ki te uru tapu nui, kia wātea, kia māma te ngākau, te wairua, te tinana, ki te ara takata, ko iara e rongo, whakairia ake ki runga, kia tina, tina. Haumie, huie, tai, kie.